Hi, hello, and welcome. Welcome to this lovely session this afternoon, where we're going to be looking at prioritizing your professional development. We've got a fantastic panel here, and just 30 minutes. So the really good news is that I'm going to be as quiet as possible and stay out of the way once we get going. Just so you know, though, we are monitoring the chat, so please do get involved, share your opinions, ask questions, come together, really kind of turn this into a bit of a community chat as well as just us. And of course, we'll be sharing links at the end of this session so that you can get in touch with all our panelists to bombard them with your further questions, I'm sure. So to get started, let's do a quick round of introductions. Could I ask each member of the panel to sort of introduce yourself, talk a little bit about how you focus on your professional development and what prioritizing your professional development means to you? Cathy, can we start with you?
Yeah, of course. Thanks very much, Tom. So I'm Cathy. I'm the CEO and co-founder of CLO 100 and the Learning Leaders Programme. I guess, yeah, that's a really good question. How do I develop myself professionally? I suppose for me, it's probably a lot of investment in coaching, actually. I really value having a coach, and I've had 3 amazing coaches throughout my career. And really, they've been absolutely invaluable to me. They've really helped not only from a career side of things, but generally kind of life coaching, to be honest. So I find that really useful. I don't currently have a coach, but I probably need to get back on that. But yeah, that's certainly something I tend to do. Previously, working for different organisations, having a mentor internally as well has been really important for me. I guess in terms of the second part of your question around prioritising professional development, I think for me it's not just dedicating the time, but it's really thinking about it, being thoughtful about it, and dedicating the effort as well and the resources that you need to improve your own skills. It's about really making sure that you're staying current and that you're, growing your network, you're building your network, you're contributing to your network so that it's a two-way thing. So yeah, I think for me, prioritizing is about really making sure that you're putting the effort in, not just allocating time for that, and really investing in your professional network.
Fantastic. And Nathan, what about yourself?
Yeah, hi. So I'm Nathan Nalla, founder and director of Be the Riot, essentially supporting organizations to develop strategies for equity, diversity, and inclusion. And I'm sure many people listening will recognize that learning is a huge part of that. So delivering learning content and workshops and so on, and thinking about, in fact, beyond that, the various different ways that people can learn outside of the traditional methods of learning, which I'm sure we can get into a little bit as well. I thought about this question around sort of prioritizing my own development. People might be surprised to hear that as someone who's self-employed, I have a PDP. So I do have my own personal professional development plan, which I created this year, actually. So not even that long ago, but sort of recognizing that I needed to really take ownership of my personal development, being that I'm no longer sort of working under a manager or within an organization that might have all of these opportunities in front of me. So I have to be sort of very sort of aware of the different ways that I want to develop, the different areas that I'm interested in. And most importantly, I think what is going to shape the work that I do to have the level of impact that I want it to have. It might be going off on a bit of a tangent, but I listened to a podcast recently, which was really interesting. And it talks about the fact that as humans, we're all asking ourselves one of 7 primal questions, right? Okay, so bear with me. I won't go through all 7. But essentially, these primal questions are a question that we're asking ourselves throughout our lives, and it's kind of central to where we find purpose as human beings. So your question might be, am I loved? Your question might be, am I safe? For me, it seems that my question is, am I having an impact? Do I have purpose? And so a lot of the decisions that I've made throughout my career, when I look back, have been around wanting to make an impact and wanting to have purpose. And of course, ties into working in the equity, diversity, and inclusion space right now. So I think about that, and I tie learning to that as well. If I'm going to have an impact, I also really need to be invested in developing my skills and my knowledge, and to be able to have that, bring that value to whatever organization I'm a part of or whatever organization I'm supporting. So I kind of look at it from that lens.
Awesome. And Laura?
Oh my goodness, I'm just fascinated by that, because I think that's the same for me, actually, Nathan. Is the key thing for me is throughout my whole career, I spent 30 plus years in the field of learning and development, Tom. And actually, what Nathan just described kind of sums up as to why I wanted to be in this field and why I wanted to be in this career. But for me, the way I build my skills, I'm a learning analyst. Those of you who know me probably know me from my research work, because that's the thing I've been doing for the last 20 years. Prior to that, I was working in education technology and change management. So as a learning analyst, the way I learn, kind of dig into that purpose that Nathan's just been describing, is about asking questions. So I get to do that in my day job, which is great. And I get to kind of be curious as part of my day job. And I get to speak to people and say, I know you believe in that model, but what does it really look like if we do it in practice? And how can we test that out? And how can we see whether or not that learning and development initiative is going to be impactful and useful in practice? So I guess I just learn because of curiosity, because of that heart of that question. I haven't been very good with coaches, I have to admit, Cathy, because I don't know why, but I think probably it's because I use research to allow the industry to coach me and to keep me open. And to keep me flexible when I speak on engagements like this. Like, for example, I would love to see how other people are building their skills in the chat, because that's how we learn, that's how we get ideas. And podcasts and events. And I'm also have just enrolled 20 years after starting a research program on a doctoral program as well. So I'm kind of taking time out for the first time in 30 years to think about things perhaps a little bit more critically than I have done in the past as well. But yeah, I'm a curious person. And for me, everything is research. Everything's an exploration. I'd love to know about you, Helen. What about you? What's your background? How do you learn?
Yeah, thanks, Laura. And I am impressed that you're calling doing a PhD taking some time out of your current practice. And that's so impressive. And actually, I say this quite often when I go last in these sort of things, that I'm in a really fortunate position to be able to reflect on what you've all said too, because I think how I develop myself actually ties in really neatly across the board here with what and resonates with what you're all saying. So for those who don't know me, I'm a Chief Learning Officer at Thrive. I'm new to this role, so fairly new. I've been in it 6 months now, but it's a new role for the business, and it's a new challenge for me. And although I've been with Thrive for coming up to 2 years now, shaping this role has really been a huge learning curve in itself. So I've had to learn quite a lot kind of on the job as I go. And I'm doing that through conversations, through making connections with people, through that kind of social learning element of what we speak about in our practice. But we're also really lucky internally at Thrive to have an internal coach. So we are supported in that perspective. So having coaching conversations, being coached, setting goals and knowing what I'm working towards. And that kind of ties into what Nathan was saying in terms of that, knowing that you're having an impact as well. So looking back and thinking, what have I achieved and what is the outcome of that goal that I might have achieved? For me, moving into this role, mentorship has played a huge part. And that's particularly from Sean, our CEO, and Mark, our co-founder, leaning into their knowledge and their understanding of why we do what we do as a business, and being able to kind of try and absorb all of that good stuff and then be able to communicate that alongside our ethos as a company in terms of what we believe good learning is and should look like. I've really kind of lent into that and been on that kind of huge learning journey for myself over the past 6 months in particular. But yeah, so I guess to sum that up, it is coaching, it is mentoring, it's understanding what impact you're having through the goals that I'm setting for myself and those wider company targets. And ultimately, what underscores all of that is human connection. And for me, that's the most important part of what I do, and the job that I get to do is building relationships and also building trust with people as well.
And do you know what, Helen, from my perspective actually as well, because you're really good at sharing when you've learned something as well. I don't know if we call that learning out loud, whatever we refer to that as, but I get a lot out of, looking at what you've said you've learned. And it kind of makes me think and reflect a lot more. So I really value people that do that. So I find that really helpful as well.
Yeah, I think reflection is really important. I mean, it's a huge part of how you learn effectively, ultimately, at the end of the day, but allowing that space to reflect. And I think doing this almost immediately after the fact, and then maybe further down the line as well, to be able to link ideas together and give yourself time to form those links with bits of information that you might be learning along the way. I actually spoke to Lavinia Mehedintu, who's the founder or co-founder of Offbeat, which is a great resource also for L&D professionals, if no one has heard of it, to find inspiration for their own practice. And we in the Diary of a CLO podcast episode that I spoke to her on, we spoke quite at length around reflection, and it's really important to do that and to take the time to do that and to share. It's almost the extra step of learning, to share what you've encountered, but then think about what the impact again is going to be of that individual piece of learning.
I think that's really interesting, because when you're talking about being proactive, like setting goals, Nathan, you mentioned about that, about prioritizing and being proactive in our own professional development, I think is something that as learning professionals, we have to do that now. Saying, oh, cobbler's children, we really ought to drink our own champagne, it's always about other people. But I think right now, in particular, I've just released yesterday the CIPD's research for learning and development. But we've got such a powerful and important job to do. And yet, if we don't equip ourselves to be ready to help the organization shift and move, then, we're going to be letting ourselves down as well as letting our organizations down. Helen, you're talking about being proactive and intentional about reflection and intentional about putting things into practice. And Nathan, you're talking about being intentional about having your own PDP. This is something that we all need to learn from, because our world is shifting so much. And if we don't keep up, our organizations will have moved on ahead, and they'll be looking at us to help them, and we'll be more and more sidelined rather than being right at the heart of being part of organizational change. So I'm really impressed how everyone here is talking about how they are being intentional about setting aside a time to be coached, to set up goals, to share, to reflect, to apply good learning practice to ourselves. I just needed to kind of flag that, because I don't see it very often. I don't see it in the people. It's always like, cobbler's children, and we laugh it off. We're too busy helping other people to help ourselves. If we don't help ourselves, we're not going to be in a fit position. It's putting our own masks on first. So I butted in there, but I just felt I needed to kind of acknowledge the intentionality in the room and to kind of encourage that with our audience as well.
I think another point there, and you're definitely not butting in, Laura. I think another point really is perhaps, even now that I think about it, I said, PDP. And I think for some people that might sound like a really big task or a really big thing to think about. And oftentimes I think we need to demystify learning a bit. So I think some of what Helen was speaking about, just carving out space for reflection, is part of that learning culture and that learning practice that is very much a daily thing that you should be doing. And sometimes when we think about learning, we think about professional development, we are thinking about, what's the master's degree or the doctorate that I could do? And often we're putting it off. But actually, what are the small bite-sized things that we should be doing in the meantime, right, where we can actually fit that into our diaries as much as we should be making space. It's sometimes demystifying what professional development and learning looks like. And actually, it does look like those small moments of reflection after a project, or after a meeting with a client, and asking, did that go well? If so, why did it go well? Or actually, if it didn't go well, what can I learn from this moment? And really sort of embodying that as a practice day to day.
Yeah, I agree. It's interesting because some of the people I've spoken to fairly recently over the last few months, I get a sense that there's also an element of, I think in the role, certainly if you're a learning leader in an organisation, or you're seen as a senior learning and development professional, there's this feeling that you're supposed to know everything already. Or that the business assume that you must know everything already because, you look after learning. So what could you possibly need to learn? And it's just not the case. We just don't know everything. And it's just as important, if not more so, I think, for us to continue to develop ourselves. And sometimes that's difficult because, it is hard, especially in that kind of position. It can be quite lonely as well. You don't necessarily have peers in your organization, or if you do, they're also your internal customer. So you don't necessarily have those conversations where you say, actually, can I just run this past you? Could you challenge me on something? You maybe don't want to say that. So I think it can be also difficult to kind of put your hand up and go, actually, do you know what? I think it's worth me investing in me as well as everyone else.
That's a huge challenge. Oh, sorry, Laura, go on.
I was going to say, I just thinking that, thanks, Helen, that question that came up on LinkedIn really links back to this, posing a question about the obstacles in our career that affected our development. And to your point, one of the earliest obstacles that I had in my career is I really wanted to be promoted. I really wanted a job where I was out of the office and out with clients, and they just wouldn't let me. I was the wrong fit for that type of role. And I think for me, an obstacle in my personal career and kind of learning from experience was this push down. I was being pushed down, and maybe it was the glass ceiling or whatever it was. And that to me released me massively. It was really early on, but I thought, you know what? I was going to swear for a minute, but I don't need this. I'm taking my current bonus, I'm investing it back into me, and I invested it into a formal program where I could build my courage, build my confidence, and I came back into the organisation, applied my skills, got promotion, got headhunted, and I was off. So for me, an obstacle in my career was actually in terms of opportunity, was actually the kickstart for me to invest in myself in a way that I wouldn't have done before. So sorry, just Helen, I just want to kind of link in to that idea there, because I think often we are feeling obstacles, but we can use that as a springboard for opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely, Laura. And I think that how I was going to broach that question was around actually, for me, an obstacle has been poor management. And I think that probably resonates with a lot of people in organizations, that they come up against difficult characters or people who aren't really effective line managers, and that actually restricts how they can develop as an individual. So for me, the obstacle really there was not having a manager who would let me run with my ideas, who was kind of keeping me in a box almost, and saying this isn't in line with where we want to be headed, even though I would personally have disagreed with that. And so that's a real challenge there. And in terms of what Nathan was previously saying, I think something that often doesn't happen in those moments of reflection and situations where you're kind of learning as you go is being open to feedback, or being able to give feedback effectively. So you as an individual learning, asking people to provide you feedback on something that's happened in order to enhance how you approach it again in the future, or that you being able to give someone else feedback in a similar situation. I don't see that happening enough, or in as high quality as needs to be done. I don't think. I'm not sure if that resonates with anyone else.
Definitely. I mean, this conversation is so insightful. Laura, you're not alone. Definitely not alone in those experiences. We often talk about the gender pay gap, but actually research also shows that there's a gender learning gap, right, which is also often linked to a gender pay gap. And so many women experience this in the workplace, that the opportunities for learning and development aren't there at the same rates that they are for men. I, from personal lived experience, anecdotally will say it's similar for people of color in the workplace, accessing those development opportunities. And although I haven't seen the research behind that, but the story that you shared reminded me of an experience that I had for a company that I worked for. And I come into this company in a role from a different sector, in a role that was very different to the role that I'd done previously, where I was managing teams. And in this particular role, I wasn't managing anyone. And I saw this opportunity to facilitate work. So someone, you know, doing the same role as me, was also facilitating workshops, learning workshops with people in the team on various different topics. And so I asked a simple question: how can I do this? And the response that I was given was that this opportunity is reserved for people who have been in the organization much longer than you have. And I, you know, when asking the question, I explained, you know, in previous organizations, I've done this. Like, I can facilitate workshops, I can support the organization. This is another way for me to bring value to the organization. But it wasn't received in that way. It was very much in order to get these opportunities, you have to first deserve them. You have to first have done something to earn them. And so maybe I'm thinking about so many different things at the same time, maybe going off on a bit of a tangent, but I think some of this is about who, you know, deserves these opportunities, right? It should be absolutely everyone in the organization, because ultimately when you're pouring into people, you're going to see that, you know, reaping rewards for the organization, right? You're going to see them being able to bring more value. And so I think that's one way to kind of look at it, but also thinking about that from a personal perspective. If you are frustrated in your role, or you do feel like you're constantly coming up against blockers, or you're feeling a sense of burnout, sometimes being able to invest in your own learning is a way to, you know, refresh the work that you're doing, you know, be able to look at your projects with a new set of eyes, or, you know, with some new knowledge or new techniques to approach the challenges that you might be facing. And so, you know, it won't come to anyone as a surprise that learning and development within organizations is also linked to retention within organizations. And so if we think about that for ourselves, you know, if I'm really frustrated here and I want to leave, are there opportunities that I can take that might be the refresher that I need, rather than looking for another organization? And to sum up, in that example that I just shared, similar to Laura, it was like, okay, you're not going to give me this opportunity, I'll go somewhere that will. And I left. I left, and I was able to use those skills somewhere else. So yeah, just a few thoughts.
I love that, because it's about, again, it's about being intentional. And Andrew's asked a question in the chat about how much time do we give to our professional development. And I think time can sometimes help us become more intentional, to say, I want to commit to X amount of time. But what I noticed in the research that was released yesterday, with the CIPD research that I've just been involved with, so I wanted to cut the data by those who'd only been in the industry for a very short period of time. And I'm seeing there's a number of different responses coming through in the chat about how much time. And what I noticed, that those who've been in the industry for a very short period of time were much more likely, like Yemisi's doing, like podcasts, hungry, like absorbing so many different things and looking for opportunities, putting themselves out there. Clement talks about test and learn, and yeah, actually only 13% of us have actually embraced test and learn. Let's try something, let's explore it as a learning opportunity. And yet it's something that, you know, those of us who are perhaps newer in the industry. And I think it's a real call to action for those of us who have got leadership responsibilities over other people in our L&D teams, because we as learning leaders, we are more likely to go on a conference and, you know, and to network with like-minded people. And actually we need something more. We need to be we need to be stretched. We cannot afford to become complacent just because we're experienced. And for me, shifting up our leadership training as learning leaders is going to be as vital as scaffolding great opportunities for the future. And I know that that's actually the thing that's kind of brought us all together under the CLO 100 banner. But for me, I'm not into having another program for learning leaders, but I am into the idea that as learning leaders, we have to be curious, we have to be hungry, we have to want to be in safe spaces ourselves, because if we can do that, we can model that with our teams. And if our teams are modeling it, then we can really change the world. So I think, this time, Andrew, isn't necessarily a thing. It's intent, and what do we do with the time, and how aware are we of the precious opportunities that we have for ourselves to learn, and how we help others to learn as well. But I know, Cathy, you've probably put more thought into that than I have, because you've been thinking about some of these challenges, haven't you, from different perspectives for such a long time now.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, either from kind of doing it in the role myself and having the experience of the challenges, and some of these are big, meaty challenges, and you're as a head of learning, you're not just looking for something to, I guess, develop yourself. You're looking for solutions that will develop you, but that will enable you to make transformational change in your organization. So, we're talking about really big things, and that's kind of what's led to the creation of the Learning Leaders program for us, actually, because we want to help address the really big, substantial things that impact organizations from a learning and development perspective. So, things like, how can we more strategically align to the direction of the organization? And that includes things like, learning more about commercial acumen and strategic thinking, things that typically you don't go, oh, as an L&D professional, I need to know that. But actually, at a senior level in L&D, you absolutely need to know that if you're going to make an impact in the business. Things like, and this has been mentioned in the comments a few times, actually, and we've already mentioned it, but, creating that safe space for learning, a psychologically safe space in your organization that allows people to kind of test and learn, allows people to make mistakes, because that's absolutely crucial in the learning process. Challenges like engaging learners. I mean, goodness, this has been a challenge forever, but actually we need to think like marketeers in this space. We need to be marketing learning as if we're our own organization within our organization. And really key things like, how do we predict future skills and capability needs for the company? So let's look at really big things. Let's look at mega trends and their impact on society, their impact on organizations, and then how can we filter that for our own company and predict in advance what we're going to need. So yeah, we try and cover, I think, some of the really big topics that are going to have the most impact on organizations.
The other side of that. Oh, sorry, Tom.
Oh, sorry, you go on, Helen. You're far more interesting than me.
I doubt that, Tom. The other side of that is, I think, and I mean, you might all have different perspectives on this, but traditionally, a lot of people have entered the L&D space without necessarily having a qualification or experience of what it takes in order to succeed within L&D, and it's all kind of learning as you go, learning through experience, which is great, but it does lend itself to this worry that, how can I always be doing better? How can I be learning from people? What does best practice look like? And I think that there is a definite kind of gap in the market for a program like CLO 100 and all those good things that Cathy was talking about, in terms of really just providing people with that sound access to a program that will take you from A to B, hopefully, and then have an impact in the organization that you're in. And that has really, for me, feel like it's been missing for a little bit of time, and might provide people with an element of reassurance once they start to get to those leadership positions and potentially into C-suite as well, to say, actually, I have done this. I feel like I've got experience. I can enhance what I've already done through doing this program, and then think about things more critically, or approach industry concerns or trends more coherently because I've been through this program. But yeah, that's just an observation that I have that might resonate with some people. I don't know, Nathan, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think you know, the more sort of senior you become in the learning space, is the more that you have to sort of think about organizational culture more broadly. And I'm finding that some of what we've been talking about has been around psychological safety, and that a number of the challenges to creating an environment that is safe for learning or conducive to learning goes beyond just the role of an L&D lead, right? You're also having to think about various other elements of workplace culture. You know, things like feedback culture, like just, you know, whether it's okay for a person to make a mistake and whether that will mean they get penalized, or actually, you know, we're in an environment that's quite agile and we're constantly encouraged to innovate and make mistakes, and that's just part of learning. That speaks to wider organizational culture. And sometimes within organizations, L&D don't necessarily have that voice or that ability to influence. So I feel like, you know, some of the points that Cathy was making about that upskilling will also provide learning leaders with this ability to navigate some of these challenges, or, you know, challenge the organization structure itself to say that actually, no, L&D should have more of a central voice in these, you know, various different aspects of organizational culture that need to change in order for learning to be able to thrive. So that's kind of something that's been on my mind. Yeah.
Yeah, I think also in terms of shifting culture, you know, oftentimes we have a blame culture view on, you know, that we can't do our job because of them, whoever they are. And to Tamar's point, you know, it's a perception of L&D changing. But actually, I think, to Tamar's point again, our own perception needs to shift. As learning leaders, as learning professionals, this is why we need to invest in our own professional development. We have to see ourselves as enablers in the organization rather than producers of programs and initiatives and content. You know, as soon as our perception of our value, our impact, our usefulness, Nathan, shifts to, you know, what can I do professionally in the organization to help the organization become equipped, then that allows us to maybe let go of some of the things that we were successful at in the past in order to be prepared and ready for the future. So I think, to Tamar's point, our own perception of who we are needs to change first. How we encourage experiments within our teams, how we encourage learning from mistakes, even if the company does it. How do we do that in our learning and development teams? How do we give ourselves permission to be able to try something, to learn from it, you know, in all walks of life? So, you know, I think our perception does need to change, to Tamar's point, but if we can, how we perceive ourselves, and I do a lot of talk about thinking habits of us, our professional thinking habits really influences our initiatives. And I know, I mean, that I'm probably opening up another whole new tangent. We'll have to carry that on. And Tom, I'm looking at you because I'm conscious of timing about where you want to go with this. But
that's fine, don't worry. This is like bonus time for everyone in the audience. You weren't planning on being here longer, but you are, because it's just that good. Isn't that exciting? But we will wrap things up. But come to one, I think, really great question is, if you could only give everyone here one bit of advice, as if you were going to tweet it out and that's all you could ever say in terms of advice for L&D leaders, what would it be? And we'll close out on that.
Who's going to go first? That's the question.
well volunteered, Helen.
Yeah. I think don't underestimate the power of your network, and lean into the knowledge of other people around you.
Yeah, that's a really good one, actually. I think network and community is super important. But I can't say that now because Helen has. So I would say, I mean, clearly the theme generally, keep developing yourself. But I think, you know, to note what Nathan referred to a moment ago, this doesn't have to be through anything formal. You know, it can be very informal, whether it's, you know, making the use of free events in our industry, because let's be honest, there's millions. We're really lucky in our industry. whether it is making more of your professional network, or, you know, from my perspective, I've always found coaching and mentoring to be really beneficial. But whatever it is, I think just keep focusing on your development.
Yeah. And so mine isn't necessarily tweetable. I don't really know what it is. We'll see what happens when I say it. Mine's more of a question. So yesterday I was on a call with a client, and we were talking about a campaign, and this campaign needed a name. And I was like, oh, I'm really terrible at coming up with names for campaigns. I just really can't think of good names. And before I'd finished my sentence, they'd already typed a question into ChatGPT and was reading out these suggestions. And some of them were really good suggestions. Some of them, you know, we might take and tweak, and, you know, and I was just thinking, oh, wow, like this is how embedded this new technology is in our day-to-day. And I haven't been necessarily using it to that extent. But I mean, one piece of advice might be just finding, you know, all of these really interesting things that are happening around us in terms of shifts, in terms of technology and ways of working. And perhaps there are ways that this, whether it's ChatGPT, whether it's gamification, whether it's, you know, interactive storytelling or VR, whatever it is, these new things that are happening, asking yourself questions about how this can aid my own learning, how this can aid the learning of those around me. And if you don't know about those things, then of course that's exactly, you know, a direction to go in terms of developing your own learning as well. So yeah, probably not tweetable, but
we'll put it into ChatGPT and see if I can turn it into a tweet for us.
Turn this into a succinct tweet for me, ChatGPT.
I mean, for me, I am super interested in anybody else's tweets that comes through in the LinkedIn chat. I know I'm mixing my platforms there, but you know what I mean. It's really interesting on what other people believe their biggest piece of advice is. Benefits of going last, I was able to write something down. So believe you can make an impact, be willing to let things go, and be proud that we don't have to be experts and that we're on a learning journey.
Mm-hmm.
Fantastic. What a response to finish on. Look at that.
Very good, Laura.
Well, I want to say thank you, first of all, to our fantastic panelists. You can't see the private internal chat, but there was chat about, we should have booked an hour. This is fantastic. And I've just been sitting here and enjoying myself, which is a marvelous way to spend the time, as I'm sure you have in the audience. And thank you for coming along, getting so involved in the chat. Our wonderful producer, Rich, who's been making sure you can actually see and hear us this whole time, is going to post in the comments now links so you can find everyone's websites, get in touch with anyone. And of course, because we're on LinkedIn, you can connect with any of our fantastic panelists directly and ask all your questions there. But until next time, thank you once again for coming. Thank you, panelists. And I'm sure we will see you again in a future session.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.